Hi, everybody. Thank you
All right.
so much for joining me. I am here with Professor Rabeya Jalil, as a couple of people have called her. Now, Rabeya is a visual artist. She is an art educator, and she is based in Lahore, where she lives and she works. She received her undergraduate degree from the National College of Art and a master's in education from Columbia University, New York. Which I'm going to make her talk about on the Fulbright Scholarship. Rabia has presented at art education conferences all over Pakistan and in the States as well. She is co-editor and organizer for the Journal of Art Education Pakistan, a peer-reviewed publication. And I think it's a very recent initiative. Is that correct? And she is the former program head for the Program of Art Education at Beacon House National University School of Visual Arts and Design, Lahore. And she's currently teaching at NCA, her alma mater. In addition to her very extensive educational bio, Rabia's creative practice includes painting, writing, curriculum development, teaching, and teacher education. Amongst various visual arts and education projects, she has received several prestigious grants for her work that she's done from the Higher Education Council, USAID, and the Prince Claus Fund. And I wanted to sort of dive right in and sort of talk about your inspirations and also bring them into your art practice. How has your art practice, and we've been putting up photographs of Rabia's art practice on our Instagram stories, as well as the posts. And I was wondering if Rabia could talk a little bit about her influences and what has inspired the work that she's been making. How did everything come about?
All right, Zahra. So I'd maybe perhaps start with the things that have occupied me for the last 15 years.
Good.
That's almost when I graduated from the National College of Arts.
Okay.
And it's really after so many years that you realize the patterns that go into your work, the kind of structures that go into your work to shape the kind of person you are and the kind of practices you do. And so finally, after when you finally do realize what your work is about, you start giving it names. And when you start giving them names, you realize that they've become so sacred, or almost they've lost their meaning completely, or almost become empty signifiers. So for the sake of names, I do think that three kinds of modes of being have really occupied me for the past many years. One is teaching, one is my studio art practice, and one is my writing practice, artist as researcher, but I'm still trying to explore that role in the multiple formats it can offer, especially in the context we live in. So yes, that's and the good part is, for me, this trio of being a teacher, educator, a person who is into some kind of visual expression, and a writer or a researcher. This kind of feeds onto each other and it keeps giving energy to each other. So that's how it has worked for me in the past, and that's, I think, what continues to work for me so far.
But tell me, what do you find so inspiring about education and academia and research? What is it that has really hooked you on, and how does that then draw into your larger practice as an artist? I know you see each of these different facets as your practice, but tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes, it's education, and it's really kind of being there in the class in front of my students that gives me most energy, because every time, at every age you're teaching, the students are really the pulse of their time. They really capture the kind of zeitgeist and the pulse of what's going on, and they keep you so updated, they keep you so alive, they keep you on your toes. And believe you me, every decision I take, in terms of me watching a movie, looking at an ad, reconstructing a book I've read, it all kind of boils down to how I would be able to share this with my students. And I kind of obsessively keep making folders of how that information will go into the different courses I've been teaching all these years. So students give me a lot of energy, and in a way, it's that teaching that also kind of fuels my artistic practice or my research practice, because it's that energy in the class, or the kind of anticipation of the kind of questions I might receive in class, that keeps me kind of thinking of of possible questions to, different kinds of aspects of being, and constantly being curious. I'm a very, very curious being, and I think I owe it a lot
You are.
to my students. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
How nice.
So it
Lucky
really,
for your students.
yeah, and it's really my experiences in teaching that have really kind of hooked me on and taken me forward. I was around 9 years at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture after I graduated from the National College of Arts. Then I went on to the Beacon House National University for about 3.5 years, and now I am back to my alma mater, as you said, the National College of Arts. And during those 9 years at Indus Valley, I also went on a sabbatical, a 3-year sabbatical, where I completed my degree in art education.
Fantastic.
So yes.
Now, Rabeya, coming back to your, let's say your creative practice, your art practice, I want to ask and begin with that. How has your art education interest, or just education in general, how has that filtered into it? I know that somebody asked a question about colors earlier, actually, and I was going to get into that as well. You use very vibrant and interesting colors. Your techniques and your aesthetic quality is very interesting. Almost childlike in many ways. It's very abstract sometimes. It's very expressive. I think that's the word that describes it perfectly. It's expressive. It seems very quick. Where does that come from?
Okay, so I get this a lot, that my work is childlike, and I'll really tell you, maybe kind of take you through the context that makes people see the work like that. But I'd really kind of begin with what I think currently my work is about. My painting work. I particularly talk about, I have been kind of looking at, I started off as a printmaker, and I guess a lot of what I do, a lot of my discipline of painting that I do currently, and I am very proudly call myself a painter as opposed to a visual artist sometimes, is really what I is the kind of attitude or discipline I got from printmaking, with the constant rubbing and erasure and the accidents that keep happening in the works, and the idea of the bleeding of paint on canvas. So for right now, where I stand, I think that my work is about mark making, as simple as it could get, and where paint really becomes the subject. Sometimes, oftentimes we kind of interchange, we feel kind of almost a burden of making something from our work, that needs to portray a kind of content. But I do feel that I aspire actually to paint in a way where the method becomes the subject itself, where the method becomes the content itself. So the work in itself, the paint in itself becomes the subject. The idea of mark making then takes over. And it's really the joy of paint that keeps me going, the kind of forms that come together through the different kind of colors, and then it's very, very difficult when it's very difficult to achieve that kind of harmony and balance, especially when you're trying to be non-representational in work, yet looking at forms that emerge accidentally or kind of subliminally. So it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of struggle. It's a very, very painful process, me struggling with my pigment and my paint on a 2D canvas.
And tell me one thing, Rabeya, what led to the move from printmaking and ceramics to this interest in paint and using colors and more expression, in a sense?
I think two things: logistics.
Yeah.
I shifted because of the kind of health environment hazards it poses. When I went to for my master's, the kind of printmaking studios there and the kind of caution they observed while taking care of acids and turpentine, it kind of blew my mind, and was kind of looking at the practices we observe here. So I suddenly got very, very health conscious, and when I came back, it kind of fizzled out. So that was one of the reasons, and also logistics.
Okay.
Printmaking does require a lot of printing paraphernalia. So it kind of very gradually and very kind of joyfully shifted into painting. The work is kind of heavily influenced by the kind of mark making that happens, the kind of accidents, the kind of surprises, and the kind of failures that happen in printmaking. So currently, my work is kind of based on these 4 ideas: intuition being one of them, mistakes being one, looking forward to mistakes and accidents, and then chances. And it's kind of constant kind of building up and erasure. And as I said, a lot of struggle when I really in a desire to achieve that kind of perfect mark that you're looking for, which at times I never get to achieve, and I keep
I
struggling
was
with the
going to ask
painting
how
for months and
often do you
months and
actually
months.
achieve that perfect mark? Because I keep feeling
Never,
you're a little bit of a
never.
perfectionist.
It's difficult. It's really difficult. It's really hard to tell when the painting is complete. And especially when, you see, it's about how you want to train the eye. And the more you see, the more you know, and vice versa. The more you know, the more you see. So every time I visit my painting, even after 6 months, I see different things to it, and I keep on adding. And it's very rare that I feel that, it's just perfect and that's completely harmonized now in shape and in balance.
You know,
Also, the
interestingly,
work.
sorry, go ahead.
No, and also, as I said, initially my work was a crossover. It still is a crossover between a kind of abstraction and representation, but I am really trying to do away with representation and really trying to go into non-representation, but it's very, very
Why?
difficult because you see, getting forms, recognizable forms, identifiable forms that are that are close to observation, something that you can kind of gather very, very quickly, are very satisfying. You get instant gratification from them. But forms that are non-representational or per se are not talking about something loudly or are not political in that way are more difficult to achieve. Where you're not even kind of sure where it'll end. So as I said, the method then or the strategy of making then takes over, and that becomes the content. And it's a very mathematical process sometimes, where you have a list of things in mind, and you have a particular way of holding the brush. You have a particular way of how you kind of craft your own brush to kind of make the marks you want. And so I just love that kind of war with my two-dimensional canvas or surface.
And you enjoy making your audience struggle a little bit to figure out what it is you're trying to do and create, right?
Sorry, say that again.
You also like the idea of having the audience struggle a little bit, perhaps the viewer a little bit, to understand exactly what is going on. You don't want to make it too easy from them, from what I can tell.
I don't know about that. I think engagement is key. They've got to connect with it at some level. For some people, they get it after maybe perhaps looking at it for a longer period of time. Some people just get it. It depends on the kind of experiences you've had in the past and the kind of training you've been in yourself as perhaps a creative person or a visual person, or generally the kind of experiences that have shaped you in terms of your aesthetic or your taste. But I think engagement and connection is key. They need to connect. Many years ago when I was in Karachi, I used to ask my cook every time I made a painting and asked him to critique on it, and that really, really helped.
Yeah.
So that kind of is an important part. The way audience reacts or the way they respond to the work is.
Some of the works that I was putting up, as I was looking at them, I was just thinking about how satirical some of them are, how clever they are, how on point a lot of them are. Tell me about that aspect of it as well. Because obviously the subject matter does make a difference, regardless of how abstract they may be becoming and how it is eventually a struggle with mark making. There is also a lot of interesting thought behind them.
Yes, if I could just hear you, I was a bit muffled, but from what I got from your question was the kind of thought process that goes into the work.
Yes, because I know, at least for me, I found them quite funny. I found some of them very clever, some of them very satirical, some of them very much on point and quite critical of society.
Yes. And at times the people have told me that they're a little dark also, as much as they're humorous and colorful and garish and a bit sometimes crass also. But I do try to, I'll tell you. People do all kinds of feminist work. People kind of are into works that are loaded with already with kind of heavy meaning attached to their working or have all these theme-based things that they're already pre-involved in. I do feel that my work is political, but it's not really about something. What really it is about is this constant a tug of war between academically trained aesthetic, and how after all these years of going into the eye training, especially what happens in an art school, we're automatically tuned to think or learn a certain way or make marks or develop our imagery a certain way. Nonetheless, I mean, all schools, different kind of with their different kinds of philosophies, have all these different modes and techniques and philosophies and vision of making and creative expression. But I do feel that it kind of limits the way one does make art. So, or for that matter, any kind of visual expression. I do try to. It's a kind of a slight rebellion also, or maybe a critique or an argument or a conversation of academically trained aesthetic, where I do try to go against or be an opponent of, as opposed to a proponent of, the kind of things that are taught in foundation year, the kind of things that are considered beautiful, the kind of things that are considered more close to observation. So I try to kind of react to that in my work a little, and adopt strategies, especially that pertain to a certain kind of didactics that is given to us in art schools. So I try to kind of go against that, and in the process, of course, as I said, the work does become representational. It is about it does eventually, my older work was conflicts in education. It's about religion in some ways. It does touch upon social constructs, but I do feel that it's more about the idea of mark making.
Very fascinating.
And what I most, yeah.
No, go on. What are you most?
No, so I was saying that, in this process, the kind of, especially the kind of work that I'm doing right now, I'm really enjoying the kind of very savage, very jittery line that comes across. I have been taking a lot of influences from abstract expressionists and from some of the German expressionists. But I do take, coming back to your very, very first question, I do take a lot of inspiration from children. And that is what really began when I kind of went on to do my master's for art education. And that is where we started looking at or reflecting at a lot of artistic processes and the kind of routes children take in the artistic development process. And that really made me look at how children work and the kind of free-spirited nature, or the kind of fearlessness, or the kind of spontaneity they have in their work, completely kind of not conscious of what the other person would think, very engulfed in their own little world, a little mark being very, 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 very true to what they really are doing, very, very sincere, So I really do get a lot of energy from the way children work. Initially, I was looking at a lot of children's work, but I, my current work is really a lot about remaking my previous work. You see, so I regurgitate my old paintings, not in a way to copy them, but every time I regurgitate or try to kind of get to my older imagery, it just becomes something totally different, because it's a very, very lateral process of making. As I said earlier, there is no end, and I really don't know when that end is reached. But I do keep in mind, or at least try to keep in mind, the kind of spontaneity with which a child works. It's very, very difficult. You see, once we grow out of a certain age, especially once we're above 10 years of age, we start thinking very, very differently. Our marks are very contrived. It lacks freshness. And it's very difficult to go back and start kind of, what's the word? Start embodying the spirit of how
that freedom,
joyfully,
almost, right? Yeah, that naivety, that freedom.
So that is why there are those you would see those clear influences in that regard. Yeah.
So sort of spiraling back a tiny bit, sorry, but you talked about how the influence of children came more into your work in your master's program when you went to go study art education. But what led to that push towards studying art education and academia? Because I know now I want to draw you towards that conversation, but I know you've spoken about the important influences of being a teacher and how academia and research for you has been such a driving and motivational factor. And a lot of that is because of your students. But what first led you down that route to sort of move away almost, well, not move away, but sort of separate yourself from your own artistic practice and begin delving into art research or regular research? What is the importance of that for you?
Yeah, you see, it was really when I started my master's, I realized, well, I started kind of reading a lot of literature around, what we do, why we do, the theories of meta teaching, and academia. It really kind of opened up new windows in the sense that kind of became more cognizant of what is it that art education really means. And it means a lot of things for many, many people. For me, it really is, it really kind of opened up, what art making or visual expression really meant. Why is it that we want art or visual art or creative education as part of a normal school curriculum? What is special in art education that other subjects would not offer? Or what is it that's particularly pertinent to a creative classroom that is lacking in other subjects? So that is where we started thinking critically of where is it that creative practitioners or visual artists add value, and the answers are I'm still kind of thinking of those answers, but I think the three most important reasons why visual art education is significant to the way we learn or make meaning is that it's a new kind of literacy. Well, not a new kind so much more, but it's in the 1980s, Elliot Eisner came up with this. Sorry?
I say it's a different kind of literacy in a sense.
It's a different kind of literacy. So somewhere around the 1980s or 1970s, what's his name? Elliot Eisner came up with this term, visual literacy, as opposed to the other three, arithmetic, reading and writing as the three more prevalent ones. And then you came up with the idea, and at the same time, Howard Gardner was looking at multiple ways of making meaning, talking about multiple intelligences. So, this other way of making language, which is very independent in a way, started coming to being, and people started looking at the significance of this as an independent visual language. And so that's what we try to do, try to find out different modes, methods, techniques of adopting ways to communicate visually. And that's what we see almost 80% in social media, where people are communicating just through the visual. So really kind of pinning in that the importance of that new kind of communication, I think, is the kind of realization that later made me get onto a lot of art education projects in culturally diverse populations. When I was in Karachi, we started this initiative called Bacho Tabdeeli, with Shahana Rajani, and I being the co-lead, and that is where we started looking at the potential of creative education or unconventional ways of making meaning and or bringing into conversation critical concepts, even to young children. So that was really the beginning of hands-on. Sorry?
How did that process go? How was that project? How was it received by the children? And what did you feel that you really learned from it?
Of course, it was a lot of learning. There were a few projects that really were in a way very. They were like watershed moments, very eye-opening, and you realize that when you go to these communities that you call underprivileged or people from this, suburban setting, and you think that you go in with your art bucket and with lots of paint, they'll be able to connect immediately. They have other issues, and perhaps art making, the way we saw it, wasn't that important, and that is where we realized that that art making is more like a cognitive tool. Thinking through materials is perhaps more important, and what comes off as in a discussion through the kind of processes, or the kind of drawings, or the kind of questions or the dialogue that happened in class, and the kind of issues that were brought to table in the communities we worked were much more important. For instance, we worked with public spaces, and the kind of oral histories that came about were just so special. And at one point we thought that these little drawings might not even matter. The kind of stories and the kind of interaction that has happened between us and the people and the little children, and what they've shared, it becomes much more precious. I remember I remember we this very there was a class of Pathan girls, and they started talking about these very, very sensitive issues about religion, and it was kind of a stimulation. It was a stimulating process where we were engaging them in a dialogue, so they could kind of start making something. But that dialogue in itself became just so exciting and so controversial, and all the little girls, fifth graders, started debating, different kinds of very contrasting ideas, and started arguing about the way they kind of saw some things that happened on television. I wouldn't like to reveal what they said, but I think the debate in itself was so triggering that we thought that perhaps the work they're trying to produce is secondary, and what they're saying becomes primary, and the kind of learning that happens in a dialogue becomes very, very essential. Another project called Mapping Migrations was tracing the histories of migration of these of communities that we studied. So we were looking at communities from Bangladesh, families who had migrated from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Burma, and the Sindh region, particularly who had come to Karachi and migrated and settled. So we're looking at those settlement colonies, and looking, and these children were out of school children who eventually would go into main school setting. So it's ITA, Idare Talim Agahi, was working with USAID at that time. So we did this collaboration with them to be coming up with this very, very integrative, collaborative project where we went through the ideas of map making, and this idea of place and location, and the idea of oral history. That is where we also introduced children to cameras, which is now a very, very popular idea. But then they started documenting their own parents, grandparents' history of migration. It was very, very difficult initially, because it was very difficult to get through and communicate. The first 2 days was like sitting almost frozen, not knowing how to communicate. But the last few weeks were just like so prolific, and they were kind of churning out stuff and making stuff and making collages and bringing up all these recordings from their families, and one thing leading to the other, interviewing their grandparents about how they migrated. So it eventually came out to be a very, very exciting project. And I think that is where the meaning really. Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. And it seems as though through art, you could actually reach so much more than perhaps even regular education. Because I'm sure just starting these stories with these kids, having them become more creative, also opened up their own, like they let their guard down in a sense as well.
Absolutely, but Zahra, here is a very, very important thing. You see, when you do all these projects, especially with communities that we call underprivileged, so called, there's a huge problem. There's a huge problem of being patronizing. You get onto something thinking that you have maybe superior knowledge over something, or you're there to kind of enhance or empower them. These are really kind of very, very these are very problematic concepts, and most of the projects that we ended up doing made us realize that it's our own inadequacies, or our own limitations, or our own kind of doubts about dealing, or limitations that really made us not that it gave a rise to a lot of inadequacies in ourselves. I remember this one of my favorite projects. So I'll give you an example of a very, very significant project in that I did in 2016 with Binish Khalid in Islamabad. It was working with the blind girls in Shamsabad, a school in Shamsabad, a government school. Binesh Khalid was my advisee in the MAR education program. She was doing her MPhil back then, and her pilot study was about trying to understand the creative expression of blind girls. Very exciting her thesis was, and we decided to kind of take it further. So I applied for a grant, and we got one from the USEFP, United States Education Foundation in Pakistan,
Wonderful.
and a US state funded grant, and we then through that little money we got, really developed. So we went again, despite having done that pilot study and knowing the kind of demographics and the nature of what we were getting onto, we went and interviewed girls. And one of the girls, a blind girl, partially blind, in her matriculation, was about to give her metric exams. She said to me कि आप तो यहाँ पे आ जाते हैं हमें इस्तेमाल करने के लिए, हमें क्या मिलता है आगे से, आप तो करके चले जाते हैं और आप चलते हैं अपनी, you show off, and then हमें क्या मिलता है इस चीज से. And that was really like a mind boggling kind of instance, and made me realize that either we're not getting into this project or we've got to make it really, really meaningful. Because if we don't, then there's really no point, of this kind of this guised grandeur that we're trying to achieve,
right.
or
because otherwise
and there's no point in being kind of set. So what we did was
otherwise it's just fanning your own ego, actually, if you don't do something properly and really give it your all and make sure that it's the kids who are benefiting, it's very well and good to just talk about it later, right? But
absolutely,
also accepting that criticism and really thinking about it, because a lot of people wouldn't. A lot of people wouldn't give it a second thought and say, "Oh, that's too bad if she's not getting anything out of it." I think it really shows to your credit and caliber that you took on board and realized that no, we need to make sure that this program is as brilliant as can possibly be.
Yes, but you see, then we had to make a contingency plan and come up with something very, very different. And almost all these projects that we've done, they changed kind of 360 degrees towards the end. And what we had initially envisioned in the beginning kind of really turned out to be very, very different in the end. And so particularly this project, we tried to make a curriculum that not only where we tried to create a curriculum that accentuated or worked with or employed senses that had got to do with the sense of touch and the sense of hear. So we really tried to minimize the visual element of it and try to build a curriculum then with a set of recommendations from the kind of experiences we had. Of course, obviously collaborating with the special education expert in that school, to be creating a curriculum that catered to people who would be using the sense of hearing and the sense of touch to build like a curriculum and a series of creative exercises that would later perhaps be handy. And that really, and it was very, very interesting. I mean, of course, there was a lot of visual element to the work, and they did come up with these stop motion animation that later we kind of collaborated we collaborated with a visual communication designer to create all these stop motion animation. And then towards the end, we had this seminar or a symposium where the Director General for Special Education then and many schools from the blind came in and kind of experienced that project that all these girls went through. And they talked about their work and the kind of experiences they had. And they couldn't see the kind of stop motion animation they eventually created, because it was a visual experience along with what do you call it, audio one. But I did think that there was a lot of excitement and confidence on their faces, and I did think that it was an experience worthwhile for all of us.
It's an achievement, so right? Because they've created something that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Wow, Rabeya. How special to hear about these projects. And by the way, I know you told me that you're not going to look at the comments, but the comments have been so full of words like impressive and interesting and really, and I think it's really very impressive. I think that's a brilliant way of putting it, to hear you talk about these projects and also hear about the impact that they had on you and how proud you feel of them. Because I think
I
That is
don't think
very
I
much
feel
a
proud
part
at
of.
all.
Oh, well,
Not at all. I don't think, every time you get onto these projects, you realize how, you realize as I said, your inadequacies and your limits and
I think
your inabilities.
you are very
Generally.
humble.
No,
You
no,
are
no,
very
not at all, not
humble.
at all.
Yeah.
I'm being very honest about this. You realize that you're not well equipped, and every time, you have all these new experiences that you would want to kind of ideally use to kind of build up further. But I guess that's cyclical process, and that's how
But
it
that's also
goes.
life, right? Like
That's
you're
how it
constantly
goes.
trying to improve yourself and move forward and gain more experiences and move forward. And I think that's part of growing, and that's very much part of education, which is why you are in the field that you are in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tell me now, I know this was obviously the educational work and the project that you've done with children, but tell me a little bit more about the other sort of master's program that you've worked upon. I know that you have, and the higher education projects that you've taken on more recently.
Um.
How did you sort of
uh,
get into them? What is the thought process behind that? Again, I know that it came out of your master's at Columbia, but
Well, I well, one of my very, very recent projects was with the Beacon House National University where I was taking care of this very, very exciting program that uh, is about teacher education and really kind of looking at what it is like to be a creative educator. And so the very, very exciting part of being in that program was that you get to experience or be with people or educators, art educators. And, over the past few years, we've also seen people come in from non-art backgrounds in the art education program to kind of get a better understanding of how to maximize their learning and teaching in an art classroom. So, and the best part is that you have teachers coming in, or educators coming in, or administrators coming in from different kinds of backgrounds, from different kinds of experiences, from different kinds of specialties, and they all coming together and talking about historical foundations of art education and kind of building up new scholarship in a kind of more local context is what really strengthens
so very
this entire interaction.
collaborative.
It is very collaborative, but of course, every course that is offered in the program offers kind of new insights into the possible ways of teaching and learning creatively. And also be looking at art as not just an object, but art also as a way of being, and kind of expanding on the notion of what it means to be a critical thinker, be a decision maker, and be a person who is able to visually express
Hmm.
so yes, so that's but I moved on to the National College of Arts, and it's been very, very exciting. It's always good to be experiencing different bodies of work. Indus Valley students were very different from BNU students, and BNU students are very different from students at the National College of Arts. So kind of adapting to their needs is it's almost uh, it's
Quite a
almost
challenge in a sense.
yeah, it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And
Tell
but
me,
this
what are you teaching at NCA now? What are you the? I
I
know that
teach
you are an
painting.
associate.
I teach
You
painting.
teach
I'm teaching.
painting. Oh, so
Yeah,
that's quite interesting. How has
yeah.
it been returning to the fine arts education as opposed to teaching teacher education in a sense? Was that difficult for you at
I was
all?
teaching studio there as well, but I
Oh,
think
you were
coming back
okay.
to teaching only studio is interesting. You see, the point is that you get to bring all of yourself into all the subjects. You see, when I'm teaching theory, you're bringing in your role as a studio practitioner as well, and when you're teaching in studio,
Yeah.
you're bringing in the kind of theoretical perspectives that you've kind of learned or developed or read about all these years. So I think it feeds on to each other, this experience.
I have a question, Rabia. So you've spoken
Yeah.
about this wonderful program that's at BNU now about sort of teacher
Mhm.
education programs and all of, working with art education as well. Is this happening across the board throughout Pakistan? Have you seen curriculums sort of embracing it or understanding the importance of it?
Yes, Zara, I really do think that this has really now become a movement of sort,
That's
in a
brilliant.
way, in some kind of space, a very kind of soft revolution where at least where we do sit together as teachers and as practitioners. Our goal is to be looking at art making as really like a cognitive tool, or like a dependent visual language that has its own set of codes and literacy. But I'd like to say here that a lot of private school systems, uh, most notably perhaps the Beacon House school system, perhaps the LGS, and all other schools that have the international baccalaureate system now, are more geared towards, at a primary level, project-based learning, which does look at very, very central ideas and questions. And through that, you are kind of integrating all other subjects where everything comes together for one central thing. So everything converges to one central idea or one central question in all subjects, be it mathematics, science, creative making, all come together to at one kind of point, and then take off from there. So these kind of new ways of education, I think, really are setting new precedents of making and learning and teaching. And I think there is kind of growing awareness within maybe school teachers, especially, that art teaching is not just for backbenchers who have nothing to do in life. Art education
Yeah.
is something that calls in for a lot of responsibility, because it is something that involves a lot of uh, it involves you making meaning of life through your visual culture, through the kind of objects you interact with, through the kind of things that you see in your daily life. So anything and everything, then when looked at through a creative perspectives, can be art. So really kind of expanding the notion of art is one of the objectives. And also some of, I think, the non-government institutions, or the kind of privately funded urban, what do you call it? There's some adopted schools whereby, for instance, the Tareen Foundation or the Dream School Project or the TCF in Karachi. I think these new schools who are kind of improvising or looking at more alternate pedagogies, or looking at other forms of teaching, are really looking at these creative initiatives, creative forms of making, where the visual arts or creative education or theater or music is playing a very, very important role in learning.
That's really important and really, really wonderful to hear. Tell me also now about what you've been working on recently. What has kept you busy in the last couple of months? I know that you're working on a new publication. Do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yes, it is a huge undertaking. As Dr. Razia
Yeah.
Sadiq and I recently started this. We recently announced it as a call for proposals. We have been working on it now for the past 9 months. We're almost done with our advisory board.
That's
It's
brilliant.
in where, and we've announced it almost, not to the public, but to our editorial board and the advisory board, and we'll announce it very soon on our website also. And we also are in the process of building our editorial board. So we are in the process of launching. We've already launched this the peer-reviewed journal that seeks to further scholarship in art education, particularly focusing on the South Asian region. A dilemma is really that when you see people trying to find scholarship or publications on how education, higher education, or K through 12 education, particularly visual arts education or creative education, has been dealt with, you hardly find any. Data, written data, because we are generally a culture that heavily thrives on oral history, and writing has never been part of a culture. However, it's kind of developing, and this is one of those initiatives that does aim to take on that and really kind of document creative practices of teaching, of learning across South Asia that are looking at more indigenous, kind of localized ways of uh, teaching creatively. I wouldn't say art, but teaching in more kind of creative formats and methods.
That's brilliant. Are you
So,
able
so
to tell us anybody who's on your editorial board or advisory board right now, or any other
no,
collaborators that you've been
we
working
announce
with?
it when we announce
You will
it. No, we wouldn't. I mean, I would like to not reveal it at this moment, but we
Lovely.
a call of proposals finished just a week ago, and we received
Brilliant.
quite an overwhelming number of proposals. We're going through them right now. Let's see. The problem is that people here do not are perhaps not in the habit of reading and writing so much.
Yes.
And then when it
We've
comes to
fallen out of it.
yes, and when it comes to kind of when it comes to even comprehending to kind of basic two-line instructions, they would much rather have like a discussion on it rather than read what it means. So, and it's across the board. You see, we're generally a culture that heavily relies on a verbal talking, or even for that matter, visual information. So just to kind of add on to the repository or an archive of documents, teaching lessons, plans, maybe insights into what teaching critical art history studio practice is like. We've started this initiative. So
That's
fingers crossed.
brilliant.
We're
And
nervous. It's
when will you release the first journal version? When do you have
it'll
a
take a year.
timeline? It'll take a year.
It'll take a year because it's a long process it's a long peer reviewed process where you are looking into proposals, and then once they're shortlisted, you will send them to the the editorial committee, who then will go through a double cycle of
Oh,
reviewing them. So it's a back and forth process, and the best ones then will go into publication. So it's a year long process.
excellent.
We're intending it to be an annual publication, but let's see. We're hoping to get into print, if not print, an e-version by next year fall.
Okay, fantastic. And perhaps for those people who find it difficult to read, you can add in a sort of a narrated version of it, like an audiobook,
Yeah,
just to
that's a
make
good
it more
idea.
accessible, right? I'm going to
Absolutely.
open
No,
it up
totally.
to
I mean, once.
questions. I'm going to open it up to questions in about a second because we don't have that much time.
Mhm.
But I did want to ask you, do you have any advice for young artists or educators like yourself, or people who are interested in entering the field of academia and research? Is there something that you think they should be working on right now, or that they could be doing to make the journey easier, perhaps, or sort of just more accessible?
I have no advice. It's just, I mean,
No?
I'm no one to give advice. I just feel that we're all here to kind of find our little places in the world, and once we've found them, which is very difficult, we need to understand what those spaces and places are like. So really, I think we must really try to understand, or kind of find our place in life and then try to understand it. That's really my advice. So really,
That is
I
very
mean,
good
I'm in no
advice,
position to give
though.
advice.
Well, does anybody have any questions for Rabia before we end this session fairly soon? Because, Instagram starts kicking us off. I'm just trying to go through some of the comments that we had received earlier. Rabia, you can also scroll if you would like,
Okay.
if you see anything, because there are many comments that are really lovely words to you. Sarah Mamutaz is telling you how beautifully you spoke.
Or Sarah is a friend, she'll say that.
I know. It's helpful to have good friends.
Right. I do think that this, I mean, we live in an age of we live in an age of exhibitionism and showing and sometimes a very crass self-projection also, which does give rise to a lot of mediocrity at times, because everyone is entitled to an opinion. Everyone has, and I mean, as much as I love that democratic process of being able to express it, and as much as the bigger centers have dispersed into kind of more interspersed centers. We've got to be kind of a little skeptical of bandwagon and not kind of just blindly start following what everyone follows, and really find a
No,
reason
you're
to
very right.
do what we do.
And I know you're not on Instagram for some of these reasons as well, but we have a minute left. So I want to thank you so much, Rabeya, for being on this series of conversations with me. It was such a pleasure to learn even more about your practice and all the various facets of it and the things that get you moving forward. Thank you so much to our fabulous audience for tuning in week after week with me. I really appreciate it. Though I know many of you are here just because of Rabeya, but that's okay. And thanks again, Rabeya.
They better be here. There, I love them all. I love them all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much, Zahra, for giving me this very, very new opportunity. Social media, Instagram language is very, very new.
Fun? Didn't you enjoy it?
It was, of course, a lot of fun, and we will do a little deconstruction session once this is over. But thank you very much for giving me giving this opportunity. Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.